All right. Welcome, those who are here. I appreciate your attendance. Today's stream is going to be a little bit different than the previous we've done. I'm going to try to focus today a little bit more on just going over specifically the functions that I tend to use most frequently. And in tandem with that, I'm going to try my very best to actually complete this in exactly 30 minutes or less. And the goal would be that I can actually field some questions specific to what I'm going to show today. So that's going to be today's focus. And for those of you who are on the Cabinet Vision forums, I have created a PDF document with some basically some useful functions. I don't really have a good way to show this at the same time as I'm doing the stream. So if you happen to have the document, great, you can follow along. If not, the ones that I do go over, I will most likely, time permitting, type up just a short little example of how I use it. So if you don't happen to have this PDF, I will try to do my best to help you get along without it. And otherwise, um, I don't know. I will try to link it when I do the recording and I upload to YouTube, I will try to create a way for this to be downloaded from Drive or something like that. So if you happen to go back to this later, I'm going to try my best to have the resource available to you, even if you don't have access to eSupport. So without further ado, I think one of the biggest challenges with something like the report designer is the fact that it's got a lot of different things, and it's one of those situations for me where you don't know what you don't know. And I find that it helps a lot when I'm trying to learn a new programming language or a new piece of software or really anything, to obviously find a mentor if you can, who can show you. And if you can't manage to find that, then the next best thing I find is to actually locate examples that would apply to your situation, because then you kind of have some skin in the game and it just helps things really click in terms of understanding, in my opinion. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to go over some of these different functions, and I'm going to start with the simplest and what I perceive to be probably the most valuable function, which is if. And if you've ever written any UCS in Cabinet Vision, you should be very familiar with the if function. So I'm going to take this a little slow at first, but once I've gone through this process of finding the function, reading it to you, and kind of explaining it, I'll speed up. So how do we get here to where we are? This is just a report. It's a fairly basic one. So I'm editing my table, and then I have a blank data line here. So from this view, you can search functions. So we're going to search for if. And when you select the function, they usually do a pretty good job of explaining down here what it's used for. But sometimes I find even with this explanation, and especially if you're not familiar with programming in general, this explanation is not always perfect. But if is a pretty simple one again. So the example I've kind of shared in the PDF would be, if 1 plus 1 equals 2, then statement 1, otherwise statement 2. So that's my first Boolean, right? If 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. So once you've built your query, your statement, your formula, your expression, whatever it is that you're trying to check, you're going to put a comma. And notice when you put that comma, or when I put that comma in there, the blue highlighting of this tooltip switched off of Boolean over to all, and the explanation changed. So every single function in the report editor that I have found behaves this way. And it feels to me like a very good way to slowly work your way through a problem and just familiarize yourself with the formulas and the functions. So, right, if 1 plus 1 equals 2, then I could do a string value. I could put, true, and then false, and close parentheses. So this is a successful application of the function. The syntax is correct, and because 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, it's returning the first result here, which is true. Now, I've written this as a string, but if I'm not mistaken, nope, it does need to be a string if you want it to be a true or false. However, you can also just do values. So now what this is saying is if 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, then return the value of 1, which generally speaking in programming languages can also be interpreted as true, or return 0, which could also be interpreted as false, right? So this is super basic, simple, very high level outline of how the if function works. Just to demonstrate what happens when you get a false, let's change this. If 1 plus 1 is equal to 3, now we're going to get the second value rather than the first because it is a false statement. So if is very simple on the surface, but you can nest if statements to do all sorts of really, really incredible things. So yeah, there you have it. That's the if statement. So the next function, or that's the if function. The next function I want to go over is ToString. And ToString is extraordinarily valuable when you want to combine two different types of data in one line. And I've kind of gone over this in a previous video, but I thought it might be worth it to just review this. So what ToString does in a nutshell is it returns the argument as a string. So in the example, they've got ToString 9, and that returns 9. And this can be confusing if you don't really understand the difference between a string and a value. So to briefly explain, a string is what I would consider to be words, letters, almost anything not a number, although strings can contain numbers, because a string is really nothing more than like a text. It's like a display, if you will. I'm sure there's a better explanation for it, but the difference primarily is that you cannot perform math functions on a string. So when you do that, you're concatenating your strings together, which is essentially adding them. You cannot do math on two strings, though. So just to go with their example, right? ToString 9, it returns 9. This is really kind of hard to demonstrate without a demonstration. So let's just say, for example, we wanted to report how many different pulls we have, or how many different hinges we've got. So what that ultimately amounts to is something like pull XYZ plus, and then I want to have like a value, right? If I had a table that I was pulling from, which I don't really have set up here, but I want to show that when I start trying to pull a value from the table that I'm working off of, which is right here, it's called the fly speed table. Because I've started this with the string, the only options it gives me are strings. So if I start instead with a value, now my only auto-populate, autofill, or, IntelliSense, whatever we want to call it, options to automatically select and add into this little sort of formula I'm making are integer values. They're values, they're not strings. So If I go 9 plus the quantity, I get a 10. There's no error. I don't have an issue. But if I go 9 plus, I don't know, cats or something, right? I have an error because I've got a value that I'm trying to add to a string. So we get around this by converting values to strings or converting strings to values. So pull xyz plus ToString 9, right? And here, let me add a space just to. So now this is basically saying, right, I've got pull XYZ and I have 9 of them. And you wouldn't never normally do this. We'd be pulling an actual name from a table. You probably wouldn't perform this exactly as I am here. But again, remember, this is just a demonstration. So using ToString, you can concatenate a text value with an actual number value, or a text string with a number value. So very, very useful for getting past some of the more, I would say some of the more difficult queries that I've built. A lot of times I will have in a report, 3 or 4 different columns that I want to use, and that's going to handle 9 out of 10 different conditions I run into. But every so often I'm going to report a record where I need to include information that I have not already built into my table. And the best way that I've found to do this is by using ToString or like ToValue, rather not ToValue, using either ToString or the value function. So I'm going to bring up the value function next. So value, I think of value really and truly as kind of the counterpoint or the opposite to the ToString function. And it says it right here. It interprets a string as a number and returns the value. So the string 3.14 cannot be added to a value. Even though 3.14 is representative of a number, you can't add a string and a value. If I change my 3.14 to just a value by removing the quotes, now we perform the addition without any issue. So if I wanted to have both of these be strings, even though one of them starts as a value, such as this, and if I want to get past my argument error here, all I have to do is type val before the 3. Wait a second, hold on. Kind of getting a little bit mixed up here, just a second. Sorry, a little brain fart moment here. What I was trying to do is this. We want to convert the string 3.14 into a value, which then allows us to perform the math on it. So anyhow, value and ToString are very, very similar. They're kind of like opposites, and really and truly I use them most commonly, like I said, for getting past these argument errors that show up when you try to combine different types of data. So the next function that I want to talk about is the len function. So using this, we can determine how many characters exist within a specific string. This is very useful when you want to do something like the example that I really would like to talk about, I guess, is going to combine the len function with the left function. So len will give us the number of characters in a string as an integer value. Left will return the first number of characters as we've defined it from a string. So in this example here, left ABCD, where we've defined a number as 2, it's going to return the first 2 characters of ABCD, or AB. So in this specific example or the specific case where I use this personally, all of my materials within Cabinavision are listed with their sheet size appended to their name. So my 3/4 white melamine has 4x10 listed at the end of the name. And that's intended to help the team of engineers when they're, placing an order for materials or whatever it is that they tend to be doing. It's just easier to know what they're building with before they take everything to the S2M center, or not before, without digging into the material schedule in the middle of their job to see, is this 8-foot material, is it 10-foot material? Generally speaking, they all know because we do have standard sheet sizes, but where this really becomes valuable is when we start driving things to the S2M center. My white melamine material schedule is by default populated with white 4x10s, but my supplier doesn't always have 4x10s. Sometimes my supplier only has 4x8s, and I'm stuck. So what I don't want to happen is I don't want my S2M center pick ticket for the shop to pull materials reading 4x10s if I know I've bought 4x8s. So rather than changing material names at the S2M center, our engineers can just change the sheet size, which will report automatically on our pick tickets. And because of a little trick that I use, we are removing either 4x8 or 4x10 or whatever from the end of my material name, regardless of how long the material name is. So obviously 3/4 white melamine 4x10 has a different overall string length than 3/4 black 4x10. So how do I do this? I'm going to just use a specific string name rather than pulling a material, and that name is going to be white melamine 4x10. So what I want to do here is I want to use a combination of length and left to trim 4x10 off of this string so that all we actually see is white melamine, and then the actual sheet size values can be used to determine the sheet size. So how do I do this? If I just do len white melamine 4x10, the value I get back is 19, which is not super helpful. But I know that all of my materials are either 4x10 or 4x8 or 4x9 or something like that, which means there's no more than 4 characters ever listing my actual sheet sizes. As we can see here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 for 4x10, or if we were going to go with 4x8, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, including the space. So I know that I can reliably, consistently subtract 4 characters from the right of my material name, and it will leave me with my material name, but without a material size, if that makes sense. So how do we do this? We're going to use the Rtrim, which is really just going to trim trailing blank values function. As you can see here, Rtrim, it removes trailing blanks from the string. And the reason I'm doing this is because when I remove 4 by 10, there's still a space at the end of my material, and I do not want that there. So Rtrim is going to pull away that space when my material reads 4 by 10 or 4 by 12 or whatever. And otherwise, the space is going to get removed as I utilize the left function. So first I'm going to rtrim this, and I usually like to close my parentheses when I add them just so I don't get mixed up, but now I'm going to incorporate left. So at this point, my string needs to be 3/4 white melamine 4 by 10. But I need to subtract a certain number from this, right? So here I'm going to type in len, because I'm trying to determine the specific number of characters starting from the left that I'd like to report. So what is this doing, right? What is this saying? It's kind of complicated. There's quite a few things going on here. So I'm going to try to break this down just a little bit, and maybe I can do some indentations to help this make a little more sense. Okay, so again, all Rtrim is doing is removing any trailing blanks from whatever is left. The left function is saying that I would like to take, based on a number, only a certain number of characters from the string. And I'm realizing this is a little bit harder to even explain than to just write it out and share it. But so at this point, I'm saying let me simplify a little more. So we know that the length of white melamine 4 by 10 is 19 characters. We know that we want to remove 4, which would give us a number 15. So how do we get to that point to where we're only removing 15 rather than 19? Or rather, so that we're only displaying the first 15 characters rather than all 19 of them. We have to subtract from this, which is what we've done right here by removing 4. So I've got length of white melamine 4 by 10 minus 4. So now I can go back and type in the left function again. So I'm even confusing myself here a little bit. Okay, so now I'm saying again, left, I want the white melamine 4 by 10 less the length of white melamine 4 by 10 minus 4. So why do we need Rtrim here if we're already getting the result we're looking for? Again, that's because I don't want to see trailing spaces. And you can see here when I put test at the end of all of this, that there actually is a space in between white melamine and test. I don't want that. So to get rid of that, I can go back in here and type in Rtrim. And you'll notice when I enclose all of this statement here, and then concatenate test at the end, there is no space between white melamine and test. So this one took me a little bit of time to work out on my own, but I feel like it's a clever way to allow you to provide really, really great detail when you want it, which is while we're using the software, while we're building our material schedules, and while we're working, while modifying the way our material reports to the shop. And hopefully this was not a very confusing thing to show. I think that if you spend time working with this on your own, it will make maybe a little more sense than what I've been able to do here. But this is something I've used in quite a few places on my S2M reports, and I think that there's a lot of value in understanding how to do this. Because again, I can't always order 4x10s. Sometimes I can only order 4x8s. And if my pick ticket out at the shop says 4x10, but all I have is 4x8s, I'm going to get a call. We don't have we don't have any 4x10s. All we have is 4x8s, you know, and so really it's just a way to provide better information. So that explanation took a bit longer than I was hoping, and we're getting close to 10:30, but I'm going to keep on going. There's a couple of other string-specific functions that I feel are very valuable, and that's going to be contains, starts with, ends with, and string substitute. So contains returns whether the second string is contained in the first string. So their example is contains hello world, and they've identified two L's, one after another, as what they're trying to see as their second string to compare against their first string. So the reason this returns a true statement is because LL exists right here in the word hello. So contains is a good way to get a true or false response to a comparison of two strings. By itself, that's fairly useless, but used in tandem with other functions can be very valuable. So, starts with, if I can type here, tests if the string in the first argument begins with the string in the second argument. They don't even really give a great example here, so I'm going to just type this out, right? Hello world, just like they have in the past. And we're going to see if it starts with HI. We know it starts with H, but does it start with HI? No, it does not. So if we wanted to add the third option here, this just defines whether the search is case sensitive or not. By default, it's false. Maybe you want it case sensitive, maybe you don't. You can leave it out though, and it will just by default search without case sensitivity. So as you can see, there's no difference if I'm capitalized or not. But if I take the I off, now hello world does start with H. So we're getting a true, once again, regardless of capitalization. Ends with is exactly the same as starts with, except as you might imagine, we're checking to see if a string in the first argument ends with the string in the second argument. So once again, I'm checking to see if hello world ends with D, and if it does, I get a true. In and of itself, this is all very useless. Like, of course, hello world ends with D, and what do we do with that? I can't see how there's any value by itself in this function. However, when we introduce the next function, you start to get a lot of control over modifying the way the information you've entered at the system level gets displayed to the people down the line or gets displayed in your reports. And that function is the string substitute function. So this is where we can start to replace anything that we find within a string with something else. In the example they provide, they are replacing two L's with two N's. So as you can see, now instead of hello world, I get hello world or new world or whatever, right? It's what am I trying to replace this string with? And as you can see here, you do not have to repeat the same number of characters as you replace it. So I can replace two L's with one N. Again, in and of itself, relatively useless. But one of the first questions that I was asked when we were initially talking about doing this AMA thing was, how are other shops handling material nomenclature? And David Slane responded with a particular format that I think he's using at their shop. And I think that this is a really great example for how we might want a material identified a certain way for the people using the software day in and day out, but we might not want that same name to make its way out to the shop floor because the shop doesn't know that we don't want to use slashes or periods in names because of potential corruption issues or database problems or syntax errors or whatever it is, right? So what we might identify in the office as 0750 for 3/4 inch could be very confusing for the people on the shop floor. And I think it's best, whenever possible, to provide the clearest information we can to really to all of our customers, internal or external. So I have prepared a couple of lines here where I've used David's example, and I've tried to break it down in such a way that it's still kind of hard to follow, but I'm hoping will not be too terribly difficult. So I'm kind of trying to simplify this just a little bit. Maybe I should just delete some of this and come back to a fresh start. All right, what this is basically saying is if this entire string here ends with ply, right? If the string ends with ply, then we're going to replace ply with plywood. It seems like a pretty simple thing, a really small thing, and most people in the shop would know what ply is. But that essentially is what we're doing here, right? I'm trying to make it more clear what core material exists within this particular material name that I've got. And I'm just gonna copy this. To bring it to a slightly simpler area. So this is David's nomenclature. It's the format that they use for materials in their shop. And what it basically amounts to is, I'm looking through my notes real quick. The way David explained it was they list their material thickness in thousandths and the face material in cut, then the back material, and then the core material. So what we're seeing here is his internal database name for 3/4 inch rift white oak with a pre-finished maple back. And so that's why we're seeing 3/4 inches here. He's defined it as the material thickness in thousandths of an inch, the species, the cut, what the back face is, and what the core is. So this is fairly simple for people using the software regularly to understand. But again, to take this into the context of somebody in the shop who's not used to this nomenclature, all they ever talk about is 3/4, half inch, or 8 mil, whatever it is that they use out there. They're not saying go grab the 0750 white oak. It's go grab some 3/4 inch white oak off of the racks, right? So to clarify the naming convention of this, to simplify this, we can use string replace. And I will walk us through it here. Or string substitute. So we've got the string that we're going to start with, which is 0750 white oak rift maple prefin ply. We need to define what it is we're trying to look for in order to replace next. So what we are trying to look for is 0750, and we would like to replace it with 3/4 inch. Got that last little quote to include it. This gets difficult when you start using single and double quotes. You should typically just pick one and stick with it. So to make this a little bit easier to understand, I'll take out the double quotation mark there for inches. But basically what I'm saying here now is I would like to substitute in this entire string this smaller string 0750 with 3/4 because I know that's easier for my team to understand. So can we take this further? Can we nest this string substitute and substitute multiple portions of the string, such as prefin, right? Prefin, I understand means pre-finished, but maybe the guy we just hired doesn't. Maybe he has no experience with this material, and we've got something up on the rack that says pre-finished plywood right here, but we don't have a sign anywhere that says, prefin ply. And our new hire is not capable really of connecting the dots. We don't want them coming in asking us what prefin means, telling us they see pre-finished. I mean, honestly, it's a little embarrassing for all of us. To have to go through that, but ultimately it's just a waste of time. So can we change multiple aspects of this entire string even though 0750 is not right next to prefin? Yes, we can, and we do that by nesting multiple string substitute functions. So when I'm nesting functions, in order to keep myself not confused, if you will, once I have a successful execution of a function, I try to think of it in my mind as like almost as like a new variable or parameter that I can just kind of plug and play anywhere. And I stop thinking about this as a converted string, and I start thinking about this as the new string we're seeing down here. So move all of it at once. Treat this entire function as a string, and nesting will be easier. So I have the entire thing copied. So here I'm going to start nesting, right? So I'm curious, or not curious, I want to replace a string from this new modified string. So all you have to do is open up your parentheses after your function is declared, string substitute, open parentheses, and then paste, which it was already here, I didn't have to paste it, but take your value that you've already figured out, put a comma after it, and now we've defined the first string that we're trying to substitute. So we've already replaced 0750 with 3/4. Now what we want to do is we want to replace pre-fin with pre-finished. Well, rather than double quotes. So I've listed the first string that I'm checking for, the second string that I'm going to replace with, and at this point, now I just need to close my parentheses for the first string substitute function I started. So now what we've got is one string that's had 0750 replaced with 3/4 that has then been processed a second time and now has had pre-fin replaced with pre-finished. So maybe the same person in our shop doesn't know that ply stands for plywood. Just a second, David. I will absolutely get into that. That's just one additional step. It should be a relatively easy thing to do, but we would just need to convert it to a string value, and it would matter. So David has asked, if you're not in Twitch chat, David has asked, how would you compensate for 0745 instead of 0750? Let's say that when he measured his material, he entered it as 0745 rather than 0750. Instead of looking specifically for the string 0750, we would first need to convert and round values to like fractions, would be the way that I would go about doing this. So let me just finish this last little quick nested thing, and then I'll absolutely show how to convert 0745 also to 3/4, because I'm sure, I mean, I would call that 3/4 still. It's nominal, but yeah. So to take this one step further, right? All we're doing is nesting one more time. So same as I did the first time, I'm going to start my function and open my parentheses. And at this point, it's just the same basic steps I did last time, right? It's a comma. I'm going to define what I'm looking for. I'm going to define what I'm going to replace it with. And then I'm going to close my parentheses. So if you start small, it gets really easy to nest these functions together, and you can really manipulate the string over and over and over if you want to. However, if you start trying to just write this out, in my opinion, at least, this is going to be very confusing. It's already confusing for me, as I'm sure you can see watching me do this. It's not the simplest thing, but it is a really good example of how you can change something that might be confusing for people not using the software every day into something that's very easy to comprehend. So there you have it. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I didn't go over every function I wanted to, but let's kind of jump into David's question here because it does allow us to work through a different function, which is ToFrac. The ToFraction function is going to convert a value that we've got to, like a decimal value, to a fractional value based on the criteria that we define. This is one of the harder functions in the report editor, in my opinion, but it's not impossible. So I'm just copying something from my other screen real quick. So I don't have to type this all up. Okay, so this is essentially taking the number 13.5934 and we're multiplying that by 16 because I want to focus on 16ths of an inch precision. And I'm saying do not round to any decimal places. So I'm multiplying my number by 16 and I'm not rounding to any decimal places here. I'm taking that value that I get, I'm dividing it by 16, I'm creating a mixed fraction, and I'm defining the denominator. Good luck figuring that one out. It's not easy, but fortunately, once you have this basic formula kind of figured out, which you can all see right here, it becomes very easy to change your precision. Let's just say that instead of 16ths of an inch, we wanted eighths of an inch. All you have to do is change the 16 wherever it appears to 8. And now we're taking that number, 13.5934, and we are converting it to the nearest eighth of an inch and displaying it in fractional form. So I would think a good precision for material thicknesses would be 1/4 inch. Maybe 1/8 inch, or if you happen to be metric, I don't know, I'm sorry, but it would probably be a millimeter value, which probably makes this harder for you guys. However, I don't work in metric, and my sheet sizes are generally, my sheet thicknesses are 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4. Obviously, 5/8 is not that uncommon, 11/16 is not that uncommon, but let's go through this assuming we're going to talk about only 1/4 inch incremental thicknesses. So I've changed all of my originally 16 numbers, which were helping me stick with 16th inch precision, to 4s. And the number David was specifically asking for is 0745. And as we can see, 0745 is not 0.745, so we've got a little bit of an issue. We need to start doing some conversions. So I've got this formula here, and I'm going to leave it here to reference. So I'm going to comment it out with a /**. So what I need to do here is I need to do a string substitution. What I'm really looking for is this material name that's been defined already by David, but I'm going to change 0750 to 0745. And what I'm going to look for is 07. And I'm going to replace it with 0.7. So now what I've done is I've taken one step to converting this string in such a way that I can pull just a portion of the string out and convert it to a fractional value so that I can report it back as the nominal thickness that we care about. So now that we've changed 0745 to be 0.745, now I need to extract this kind of beginning section, if you will. So we can do this a lot of different ways. But I'm going to go with left. And I know that I want the first 5 characters. And I know that I'm I guess I would say I'm sort of cheating here because I know exactly what I'm looking for, but I know that the people watching this stream are smart enough to extrapolate how to do this for their specific conditions on their own. And I would also like to encourage everyone, if you've got one of these types of conditions that you would like some help with making more flexible, let me know. I will gladly help you out. Okay. So I'm going to carry on with this example and hopefully it'll make sense to you guys when I finish up. So at this point, I have successfully pulled out this value that I need from this material name. So now I need to convert this value that I've got, which is not yet a value, to a fraction. So you can see right away, if I try doing this inside of ToFrac, I've got this argument error, wrong type of data at ToFrac. They expected a number, but all I've got here is a string. So we need to convert our string to a value. So we've got rid of our error, but 149 200ths is not at all useful to any of us. Well, it's not useful to me at least. So this is where it becomes important to add the rest of all of this mess we've got here, where we're rounding a number and converting it, and defining the denominator and how we're going to get this done ultimately, right? So that is not in the right spot. My apology. This needs to be right here. A lot of parentheses here. I'm just trying to follow. There. So I'm rounding this value here. Once I've got it rounded, bear with me here. This is a good one, but it is difficult. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad this is entertaining you, David. I'm gonna keep going with this. Hopefully you guys are not losing patience. This is definitely this is a really great example of what we can do with this. So Just stick with me on this. I know that this is doable. We're actually very, very close with this. So right now what's happening ultimately is it's rounded my number, but we have not defined the way in which we want to round it. So it's just taking 3/4 and it's rounding it up. You might absolutely be right, Tristan. I was just thinking it needs to happen after rounding. So as I'm kind of counting my parentheses, I think it might need to go right here. Hmm. Ah, there we go. All right. So, uh, at this point for me, it's time to start treating this entire thing as one sort of line rather than broken up this way. Because now that we actually have this value, I have to do another string substitute with the original. So we'll copy this value and that was not what I meant to do. Hmm. I'm going to simplify this and stop changing all of this stuff around because it's a little much for me to get my head wrapped around completely. So we're going to go back to this simple. Here's the original name, and how do we get 0745 to read as 3/4? Yeah, honestly, I can fumble through this, but I am not really sure where I need to plug this all in. And for me to just start throwing darts kind of feels bad, but I'll stick with it for a second longer. I think that that's pretty. be fair. There we have it. So, no, it's okay, David. I appreciate it. Honestly, I always get really nervous when people are watching me figure something out, but that's okay. I don't really mind. So what I kind of realized I needed to do here was I know I'm checking for 0745. If I really wanted to build an extremely robust statement here, I guess, I would need to take this even a little bit further. And I would do that by actually pulling that first value out in a slightly different way. And then this 0745, I would probably have extracted this out of the string a little bit of a different way and converted it to some sort of perhaps project specific variable that can be called back right here. So I'm not using a static string value like this because, I mean, this can work. If most of your material is 0745 or something, that works. But if you're 0745, 0746, 0744, then this particular example doesn't work because it's not a parametrically flexible value. It's just a static string. But we have pretty successfully gotten this to do exactly that, right? That is exactly correct, David. Yep, we have to pull out the first four characters, add the decimal, convert it to a value, convert the value to a rounded fraction, and then call back that rounded fraction as a string for what we're searching for as the first string. So, um, I think the value in this really is less about this particular example and more about the fact that, like, you can basically make your data do whatever you want in so many different ways to appeal to just the different people within your organization. Engineers don't use the same terms as designers, and designers don't use the same terms as customers. And, we all speak different languages to an extent, and being able to convert this stuff in this particular way is very valuable. More than anything, this is a really fantastic example of how we can use a bunch of different functions together to actually get what we want. And I feel like it fits really well with cabinet vision in general because with cabinet vision, we all constantly run into roadblocks, and the solution is almost always write a UCS to work around it. Or, how basically the questions I see most often are I need to do this, but I can't with the construction wizard or with the conditional statements or with, connections. I can't do this. Does anybody have any ideas for how we can work around it? And that's exactly what this is. We don't necessarily like working around things, um, but it's really nice to be able to. So one last little thing I want to go over before I end the stream for today is one of the functions that I do use periodically is RGB. And basically, it's three number values that you can use to change the color of your text. One of the ways that I do this is we sell jewelry inserts in our closets, and we can't always, get our standard stock size jewelry inserts. So we order a lot of custom inserts, but we do have 4 specific stock standard sizes. So in order to help our inventory manager not buy on an order specific for a custom customer, if you will, a standard insert because they didn't know that what we needed for that job was a stock one. So in other words, if my standard width, and let's just forget about depth and height or whatever, but if my standard width for a jewelry insert is 24 inches or 22 inches, those are the 2 stock sizes that I've got, I want my report whenever my jewelry inserts show up as 22 or 24 to state, stock, pull from inventory, rather than just listing the size, because we want our inventory turning over, right? You want to rotate your inventory as much as you can. You also don't want to bloat your inventory. So if we keep 10 in stock, and every time one of these stock ones rolls through, we just order another one, what's the point of even having the inventory? We might as well just burn that cash. It's useless to us. Versus, we keep 10 in stock, we reorder at 5. And changing the color of the line when that criteria is met is something that I have found has been very helpful for our inventory manager. So I will go ahead and just demonstrate kind of on this one, I think. So let's just say that ply is the word we're looking for, or ply is it's a word, not a value, but like, let's just bear with me on this, okay? So if contains what am I trying to do here? Basically, I'm trying to see if this string that I've got contains the word ply. Just this is too much at once for me to. I was just forgetting to add another parentheses at the end of that. But anyway, all right, so I'm just checking to see, right, if hello world contains LL, report 1 or 2. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to report 1 or 2. All right, so I kind of did two things at once here. So I've got a line here that just reads hello world. And that's actually what I'm trying to figure out. So I've got color here, and I can add a formula. And basically what I'm trying to say is, if my value here contains, if my value here contains LL from hello world, make this red, otherwise make it black. And so, yes, it is hello, it says hello world, so it's making it red. But if I change it to hello world, well, it's still red. I got a little ahead of myself on this one. I'm sorry. Basically, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is how you can query a specific value and change the way it displays when those specific conditions are met. And I didn't work out the exact example here for you guys before I got to it, and I apologize for that. I'm going to try to include something a little more basically a little bit easier to follow. And until then, I will show you if I can find it here. I'll show you how I've actually done it for my jewelry inserts, the actual example I'm talking about. So basically what I'm checking for here is width and length. So for each of my reported widths and lengths, if they are these sizes, and the name of my product contains jewelry, and my jewelry insert's color has been defined as black because I have a note in my rooms for our sales team to pick the colors. Then, right, if it's all of those things, mark it as red. So if it's a standard size and it's a standard color and it's called a jewelry insert, mark it as red. Otherwise, mark it as black is what this is basically saying. And all of this is in the color. And I also have it set up to go bold. So this is just basically a way that you can conditionally query your different values, once again, to display a little bit differently. And my version 2022 is not in great shape right now, but I'm going to try to throw in a couple of different jewelry inserts to just show you guys how it's actually working. Oh, my boxes are wrong. I don't think I'm going to be able to show you guys because my version 22 is not in production yet. Just jump in 12 and then we'll end the stream. Come on, Slowpoke. Well, I might have just crashed the software. Doesn't seem like it's gonna pull up my reports, and so rather than kind of boring everybody with this for no real reason, I think you get the point. You've got the example, you've seen it. I think that there's a lot of value in changing the color of what you display on your report, changing the name on your report, and there are even a couple of functions you can use to force everything to be uppercase or convert something that is all uppercase to only having a capitalized first letter. Hey, look, it showed up. All right, so here you guys can see I've got my stock sized jewelry insert. We've listed the specific sizes on here for our hardware manager because we do have 4 specific stock sizes. And then this sunglasses tray, which is not a stock object for us, it's not a standard item. We are calling out the exact sizes that we need, the color that we need, and when we order from this company, they have categories that are like small, medium, large, and extra large. So when it's a stock size, I leave out all the extra information about this is like a large tray, it's within this range, and instead I just call out the exact size, our internal SKU that our hardware manager has decided they wanted for this particular item, and we call it out in bold. That way it just makes it a little more obvious what we need to do, and everybody can get on with their lives rather than looking up a bunch of information or keeping a book on hand or whatever you would need to determine at a glance whether something being reported is stock or not. So, went way over today, and I apologize to you guys. I know that everyone's got, lives and work and important things that they're doing, so I do apologize for running a little bit long today and kind of rambling here and there. But thank you, David, for the question and example for me to run through. That was really helpful to kind of help demonstrate. And you're absolutely welcome. Where's Putty? Thanks for coming by. Hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And thank you to everybody else as well. I really appreciate your participation. And um, this will be the last episode I do on reports. I'm gonna put up a poll on the forums to see what people are interested in next. I know there's been a lot of talk about like photo vision, and there's been some talk about a couple of other things. If we're gonna do a photo vision one, I'm gonna probably reach out to, I think Jonathan Hammond is the name of the person who's been responding with some pretty good pointers and see if they'll work in tandem with me on this to do a nice photo vision. And otherwise, we'll see what everyone else is interested in. And you guys are very welcome again anytime. Hope you guys have a great Friday.